this session today to be able to make this presentation accessible to people in the future, just so that you're aware of that. So thank you all for joining us for the very first event as a part of our Be the Change Sustainability series. I'm Laura Wiebe, and I'm the Sustainability Specialist for the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. MCIC's Be the Change Sustainability Event Series encourages Manitobans to participate in activities that encourage awareness and actions that support progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. Tomorrow, October 17th, is the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. And the theme for a discussion on Fairtrade t-shirts is centered around that eradication of poverty, which is Sustainable Development Goal #1 and a guiding principle in the production of Fairtrade goods. I would like to acknowledge that MCIC is based in and that I'm joining the conversation today from Winnipeg. This land is Treaty 1 territory and traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm familiar with MCIC, and Darryl, if I could just ask you to go ahead and switch the slide. Just advance by one, that would be perfect. MCIC is a coalition of Manitoba-based organizations involved in international development. Our mission is to support, connect, and amplify the work of our members and partners while directly engaging and collaborating with Manitobans for global sustainability. MCIC develops and delivers tools, resources, and assistance designed to help Manitoba schools and educators contribute to international development, the Sustainable Development Goals, and fair trade. MCIC is also responsible for distributing Government of Manitoba funds designated for international development and humanitarian projects. MCIC manages the Fairtrade Manitoba program and is a designated Fairtrade workplace. MCIC has embraced online meetings and events, and we are pleased to have the opportunity that wouldn't be available to us in person. Special guest Darryl Reed is joining us today of Green Campus Co-operative out of York University and is joining the conversation from British Columbia today, I believe. We are pleased to welcome delegates joining us from educational institutes across Canada, business owners and managers, civic representatives, coaches, instructors, teachers, and other people interested in more information about the international textile industry and supply chain, and why Fairtrade t-shirts are socially and environmentally just option for organizations, schools, teams, and businesses in Canada. While many delegates are certainly familiar with Zoom meetings, I just have a few housekeeping notes about today's session. The session is 1 hour ending at 1 p.m. Central Time. It'll be recorded and posted on MCIC's YouTube page. Once available, I'll send the recording link to all registrants so that you can refer back or share with your friends or colleagues who weren't able to attend today's sessions. Darryl's going to speak for about 45 minutes or so, leaving some time at the end for discussion and questions. We'll use the Q&A function, and Darryl, if you'd like to advance the presentation by one slide, perfect. And I encourage you to ask lots of questions at the end. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to Darryl Reed. Darryl is the president and founder of Green Campus Co-operative. He teaches in the Business and Society program at York University in Toronto. He holds PhD degrees in ethics from the University of Southern California from 1997, and political economy and public policy also from the University of Southern California in 1995. His primary research focus is on the social economy in the context of development, with a special emphasis on cooperatives and fair trade movements. He's the author of more than 40 academic articles and chapters, and he has served as the president of the Canadian Association for Studies in Cooperation for 5 years. He's also served as advisor to various fair trade organizations, including the Canadian Fair Trade Network. So Darryl, I'm turning this over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I just want to thank MCIC for promoting this. MCIC has just been so wonderful in fair trade. They've been a real leader across Canada in this movement, and this, I hope, is just another in a long series of events and activities that they've taken up. So I'm going to assume that most of you know quite a bit about fair trade and quite a bit about about the SDGs, but we'll go over things quickly and then we'll start to talk about t-shirts and cotton and how this is a wonderful vehicle for promoting the SDGs. So here's what I'll go through today. It's a lot. So I'll go through the first parts a bit quickly and try to leave lots of time for discussion because I think that's might be the most fruitful part of everything. So we'll just go over the SDGs quickly, fair trade, cotton. I'll talk a little bit about our organization and how we try to promote fair trade in the SDGs. And then we'll get into the heart of cotton products and t-shirts especially. So you are all aware of the SDGs, no poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. Now, most of you may also know that before we had the SDGs, we had the MDGs, the Millennial Development Goals, and they were instituted in 2000, and they were supposed to have been completed, fulfilled ideally by 2015, and then following on from them came the SDGs. Now, as you'll notice, some of those are very similar. The first one, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, sort of sums up the first two SDGs, achieve universal primary education, promote gender. Most critics will say we did not do a very good job at meeting the goals of the MDGs. And which raises a bunch of questions then about the SDGs and why we think we can do better with the SDGs. So there's lots of questions about the SDGs then and how we're supposed to achieve them. Now, one of the questions that emerges is how all these different goals are related. And you see some people have lots of ideas about how they're related and how some support others. And if you work for some, they will, facilitate others or not, which is all very good and important, and they are definitely interrelated. But there's some more fundamental questions about the SDGs, which I think we really have to address. And I'll just go through those. I think they're pretty broad questions, but important ones. So the first is, who is opposed to the goals? And that's an easy question to answer in some ways. Publicly, nobody opposes these goals. In principle, how can you be opposed to, no hunger and no poverty? Privately, however, and in practice, there are a lot of people, organizations, businesses whose interests don't necessarily align with the goals. So unless some changes are made, different incentive structures are made for them, they practically won't take a lot of action towards achieving the goals. So the next question is, who is responsible for the goals, for achieving the goals? So in one sense, we all are. I mean, we all have this sort of moral obligation as consumers, as citizens, as firms, as organizations, civil society organizations, public institutions. Legally, however, nobody's responsible. You can't take anybody to court because they have not fulfilled the goals. So the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, like the Millennial Development Goals, are voluntary. And that's what many people see as a problem for them. It's not any hard law or policies. So then who is going to be motivated to achieve these goals if they're voluntary is the next question. So there's two types of motivation. One is sort of a moral motivation, and we have lots of NGOs, we have mission-driven businesses, we have lots of public institutions, schools and hospitals and all sorts of institutions out there. We have citizens, consumers, and they're doing a lot of work. You know, organizations like MCIC are very much committed to helping to achieve these goals. And then there are people who have a more pragmatic motivation. Achieving the goals may be linked to them to other interests, their business interests. That includes firms who might develop niche markets so which they can promote themselves as being responsible, or entire industries. And industries often have an interest in promoting the goals as part of a larger goal for evading stronger regulations. They don't want hard laws that are limiting them. So they prefer soft law, voluntary regulations. So it's two different types of motivations for achieving the goals. And so who is best placed to promote these goals? Well, some people would say if we give firms free rein, and they will do it. The profit motive will lead to economic growth, and if we have economic growth, then that will play a major role in fulfilling the goals. Some people would also say that firms, you know, are not without their own values. They have a commitment to CSR. A lot of people are concerned about these arguments because these arguments didn't seem to get us very far with the MDGs, and now we're making the same sort of presupposition with the SDGs, some people would say. Then there's governments, and what can government do? Well, they can regulate business to force them to do things or provide them with incentives. They can also contribute to the goals through their social policies, their procurement policies, and some have done that. The problem has been in the last 20 years or so, most states have not had the same level of autonomy. They've not had the same tax base. They've been reluctant or unable to regulate business to do a lot of these things. Now, they've done some wonderful individual initiatives, but they're limited to what they can do because of the larger international and national political economy context. So that leaves us with civil society organizations and mission-driven businesses. And what they've been doing over the years, and many of you would have heard of organizations like the Forest Stewardship Council, you know, the Rainforest Alliance, organizations which have tried to encourage businesses to be more responsible by drawing upon consumers, ethical consumers, consumers who are willing to pay a little bit more if products carry a certain label. We call this sort of a form of non-state regulation. The state's not involved. It's these civil society organizations, for the most part, trying to set standards for firms and backed up by the purchasing power of ethical consumers. Now, I hope that sounds familiar to a lot of you because that's what Fairtrade is all about, in a sense. Fairtrade is a non-state regulatory initiative, and it has explicitly aligned itself with promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. So the question is, how can Fairtrade do that? Now, the first thing I have to say is that fair trade is not one thing, in a sense. There's the initial Fairtrade International, which is the main certifying body, and that's what we're going to talk about. Then there's all sorts of other spin-off organizations which claim to be fair trade. But even within the main body of Fairtrade International, of which Fairtrade Canada is a member, there is a division. Now, On the broad mission, everybody agrees that fair trade is about supporting small producers and workers. And I put the and workers there in parentheses because originally fair trade was primarily about supporting small agricultural producers. And it became controversial when fair trade also moved to having estate production on privately owned estates. And this gets at a basic division within fair trade, where there's basically two strategies within Fair Trade International and two means for promoting those different strategies. And one is a strategy of promoting corporate responsibility, getting corporations to pay fair prices and to respect labor laws. And fair trade does that by requiring them to pay minimum prices, to have social premiums, if they want to carry the fair trade mark on their products. The original fair trade, which was often referred to as alternative trade, is more of a solidarity-based trade system in which you have organizations who are involved because their commitment is to supporting small producer organizations. And most of these organizations were actually set up with that particular purpose. They may be for-profit organizations, but many of them are cooperatives, many of them are NGOs, small businesses, you might get some B corporations, but they have a strong mission to support small producers. And their goal is really to build the organizational and productive capacity of these organizations. And in doing that, they want to increase their ability to extract value added. They want more of the profits from fair trade to go to these small producers. And they do that by helping them move up the value chain into higher processing and down the value chain, helping them go into product diversity, new products, developing local markets, and all sorts of other things, which provide them with more resources. So in a sense, we have two different types of impact of fair trade, whether it's the more corporate responsibility version of fair trade or the more solidarity-based trade version. The first promotes fair prices and wages and talks about poverty reduction. The second is really trying to promote the economic autonomy of small producer organizations. And in doing that, they allow them to accumulate wealth and knowledge. And how does that then, these two different strategies, impact their abilities to promote the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, basically, the CSR model sort of restricts the autonomy and the ability of small producers because it wants them to focus on supplying them with products, whether it's coffee or cotton or tea. And they're very demanding, and they don't want small producers doing other things that will distract them from focusing on the quality of their products. They don't want them moving up the value chain because then they're taking the profits away from these corporations. So in a sense, they become a bit of competitors. There's a lot of pressure on them to reduce their costs and other things and not be involved. And so while these organizations do pay guaranteed minimum wages, they have to respect labor rights, they provide a fair trade premium, that does contribute to lowering poverty, reducing hunger directly. And through that, these small producer organizations may themselves be able to undertake initiatives to promote education, quality, improve healthcare. And sometimes corporations will, if you're invested heavily enough, the market is big enough, they will also maybe set up a health clinic or something in a village, or put some money into a school. But they're not fundamentally changing the business model of small producers. They are just at the bottom end of value chains, and their only economic options are to sell their raw materials to these corporations. For solidarity-based trade, however, these organizations have been able to learn about markets, they've been able to develop their organizational capacity, and they've been able to accumulate wealth through moving into other products, moving up the value chain. And when they have that more wealth, more autonomy, then they can make decisions which more directly impact on the development goals, because these are the people who have the most invested in clean water, in quality education. It's their children that need to go to school. It's their health that's at issue. They're the ones suffering from the inequalities. So if they have the capacity and the resources, they're motivated to contribute to the SDGs, and they know their local communities and their local needs. So these two different models of fair trade then are likely to have significantly different impacts when it comes to promoting the SDGs, although both carry the same fair trade label. Okay, I hope that was mostly clear. I want to talk a little bit about cotton, because cotton is what we're into. And cotton is a very controversial product, as you all know. Cotton has long been a site of unsustainability and injustice. I won't go through a whole history here, but you're probably aware of most of this. So the production of cotton uses tremendous amounts of water, and in many countries it has just lowered the water tables incredibly. It's also the largest site for the usage of herbicides and insecticides. Globally, it's said about 10% of herbicides are used in cotton, and up to 25% of insecticides are used in producing cotton. There's the processing of cotton, use of dyes, and all sorts of other things. And then there's a whole fashion industry, fast fashion, rapid turnover. People are saying, many garments these days are being worn 4 or 5 times on average. And promotional goods. I'm not sure if any of you have ever been to one of these large sports events where they give away these promotional t-shirts, which are very low quality. You wear them once or twice, they fall apart. I wish the Toronto Maple Leafs were in a place to do that, but they never make the playoffs. So, but the Raptors did. So this is a huge problem in terms of promotional goods. We just waste a lot of cotton and goods once they're produced, and we don't have good life cycle means in place to deal with these. Now, in terms of injustice, cotton is, the perhaps best recognized colonial good, maybe only seconded to coffee or cotton. And of course, India is the place where we've historically seen this most, but it's been in other places as well, in West Africa, Brazil, even the southern United States, where cotton was very closely linked to the slave trade, as it was in Brazil as well. And it was also a major issue in the Civil War because of that, because the southern cotton producers didn't want to have to sell their cotton to the northern states, the manufacturers. They wanted to sell it to Britain. So while we think that the southern, the Civil War is largely about, wanting to free slaves, it was really an economic war in any sense. Some northern folk were very concerned about slaves, but they were also interested in the profits in getting cheap southern cotton. In the north, as we all know, the Industrial Revolution occurs in the UK, and it's in the cotton mills of Manchester where that happens. Under those extreme conditions, child labor, 18-hour working days. Even more recently, we've seen that as we're shipping all of our northern industries to the south, and the cotton industry goes back down. And in Latin America, we see it along the Mexican border and in the maquiladoras, but also in Honduras and other places throughout Latin America, but also, of course, in India, Bangladesh, China. And the other side of the injustice is the huge subsidies that many large cotton producers receive in the north as well. But as there is exploitation, there's also resistance and solidarity. The whole nationalist struggle in India, of course, was based upon the Quit India movement and the promotion of raw cotton and not collaborating with the English on this. We get labor rights movements. This is where a big push for unionization occurs in the UK during the Industrial Revolution. Later on in the US, we see that as well, and especially around the organization of women workers as the garment factory becomes feminized, as it were, and we get the organization of the ladies' garment workers, unions, and others. Also, now we're seeing that the organization of workers in the South, which is a huge problem in the maquiladoras in Latin America, but also in other countries as well. And we've also seen resistance, especially from student organizations, civil society organizations in support of Southern workers. The Clean Clothes Campaign in Europe, the Fair Labor Association, the Workers' Rights Consortium. And fair trade, in a sense, is a continuation of these struggles. What sets fair trade apart from most of the labor rights organizations is it goes all the way down to the bottom of the cotton value chain, whereas the others mostly focused on the garment workers. So fair trade cotton really looks at justice and solidarity along the whole cotton value chain, going right down to the farmers, then up through the various stages. So the Green Campus Co-op, here's a few pictures. I should just introduce these two people over here on the right of your screen. Number 12 is Erin Bird. She works with Fairtrade Calgary. She's been on the board of Fairtrade Canada. She's been a wonderful supporter of Fairtrade and of ours. She's, works with universities and colleges like Beauval College to get them to wear Fairtrade garments. And next to her, number 7, is Eileen Chen. Eileen is a graduate of the University of Windsor. She's worked with Fairtrade Toronto. She's been on the board of Fairtrade Canada, and she's been one of our employees since last June. And Eileen does lots of wonderful things for us, including from time to time dressing up in silly costumes and things, which I've avoided those pictures. So Green Campus Co-operative started with a situation and a problem. As Laura said, I'm a professor at York University. I'm currently this year at UBC teaching there, but I've been at York since the last century. And there, in a business and society program, I worked with a lot of other faculty members and students to talk about what social justice and sustainability mean on campus. And how we promote them and what issues we're interested in. We were very much interested in, the investments of the university, labor rights, sustainable products and processes, and fair trade. And we had students work together and set up organizations, and they had some successes. They got the university to adopt, labor rights standards. They got them to set up a sustainability office, which was huge. But there were ongoing problems, and one of those was actually getting sustainable products. And in particular, at that stage in this 2006, 7, 8, there was no fair trade cotton really. Fair trade cotton just came out in 2004. And whereas, garments were a big issue around workers' rights, we didn't really have any fair trade garments. So this is our original board members. And so what we decided to do, our solution was to be the solution. So we said, well, if nobody is importing fair trade t-shirts, we need to set up a business that does that. We need to get students involved, both as activists and as students who are interested in sustainable businesses. We need to align with universities' missions and priorities, draw upon their commitment to sustainability, social justice, experiential education. And in 2011, New York University Bookstore was the first one to have fair trade t-shirts for sale in their bookstore. And they continue to be a really strong supporters of ours. And we need access to university resources and relationships, human resources. This is a graduating program from the business school on cooperative studies, and we were able to get them to fair trade bags for International Year of Cooperatives. And here's another shout out for one of our board members, a professor as well, John Similides, who sells fair trade t-shirts when his spare time. So this is what we did. We set up a business because this made sense for us, and to get fair trade products on campus, but also to teach students what it takes to set up sustainable businesses and how they really need to be the agents of change. So our business strategy was to focus on affinity markets. And here affinity markets are those who have our same values as we do for the most part. So universities, schools, cooperatives, NGOs, public institutions. And there's a good alignment there with the fair trade campaigns that came out for fair trade schools, fair trade universities, fair trade towns, faith groups, workplaces. We focus on these institutional buyers because that's where we get the most bang for our buck. We're a very small organization, so we don't have a storefront really or anything. And we knew we needed to develop over time. So we started with basic crew neck t-shirts, but we knew we needed to develop partnerships and add more products and services over time. But really, our whole plan, as it was in that alternative side of fair trade, is to drive value to the bottom of the chain. How do we do that? And we as a nonprofit are well placed to do that because any profits we have go back into our organization, our mission. They're not going off to shareholders somewhere. We are able to get a lot of help from experiential education programs. Students might get paid part-time, but they might also get credit for taking a class in which they can work with us. We have a voluntary board, which doesn't get paid, and it's a working board, and we have other volunteers. So what that means is that, and here we sort of put this out on what it costs for a fair trade t-shirt, and this was sort of part of a study we did on one of our suppliers when we were doing this, trying to figure out where the value added is going. And hopefully you can see from here that the bottom part of the t-shirt is the vast majority of the t-shirt. And that's where money is going into cotton farmers, but the various processes involved, the ginning the cotton or spinning and knitting it, dyeing it, cutting and trimming, printing, packaging. So all that work, all that value added is being done in the South. Of course, we have to ship things here, we have to pay duties, and we have some costs here as well. But again, the whole purpose in our structure is set up to allow us to drive that value down to the bottom of the chain. So how does that work in terms of us promoting the sustainable development goals and really enabling our partners to do that, because we basically provide them a market for the most part. So to understand this, we really have to talk about the value chains. And part of fair trade is to have short value chains. So you don't have a lot of what we typically call middlemen in between, taking most of the value out of the value chain. So we have two primary value chains, and we like to be very transparent. Most people don't like you to know where they're supplying from. We do. We're very transparent, and we work with two organizations. The first value chain is the producers are Chetan Organic. This is a great organization, which I'm going to talk about. They're in south central part of India and in Andhra Pradesh. And then the Raj Lakshmi cotton mills are up in Kolkata, formerly known as Calcutta. And our second value chain, the producers are Agrocell, which are located up in the northwest of India in Gujarat. And Assisi Garments is located in the southern part of India in Tamil Nadu. And I've had the opportunity to visit these organizations and see how they produce. So I'm just going to talk about two of these organizations because we don't have a lot of time. And this will give you some sense of how they contribute. So Chetna Cotton Producers Association is a cooperative. Its membership are primarily tribal groups. They've got ongoing activities to incorporate new members, to incubate new cooperatives. As cooperatives, they have a very strong concern for the community. 100% fair trade, cotton, so guaranteed minimum prices they receive for that, social premiums. They provide their members with revolving loan funds, which they get support from some of their buyers for. 50% of their harvest is pre-financed. And then they have been able to set up other programs like food sovereignty programs and other similar programs. I can't get into all of those here now. They have committed to sustainable production and agroecological approach. They have a watershed project going on with a German NGO. They're very concerned about conserving local seeds. They have a seed bank, local seed varieties, and a broader local economic vision. They're trying to move up the value chain so they don't just grow the cotton, but they try to gin it in everything as well to get prepared. They also own 10% of Raj Lakshmi, the spinning mill, which is a really important thing where they're, again, getting value added further up the chain. But they also have a much broader local economic development strategy because they don't just grow cotton, they grow other products with their cotton and they sell those into local markets. And so they diversify and they support these projects and they do the processing. So they set up mills, so that generates employment. So what that translates into then, of course, they also have other things, specific programs for women's labor, because women do a lot of very tedious and laborious tasks. And so they actually sort of set up equipment rentals where women can actually get use of technology, labor-saving technology, which they can use. Again, all those tasks should not necessarily be women's work, but practically they end up being that way. So they've tried to provide technology, make it available for women. So what that leads to is them being able to promote a wide range of these sustainable development goals. And I won't go through all of them, but you can sort of get some sense of how that works because they have more autonomy now because they're not just selling raw cotton. They're involved in a wide range of economic activities. They bring in more money. They have more partners. And this makes them really, I think, the best producer organization in fair trade cotton. Incredible. I could talk for them for hours, but I can't really because we don't have time. So on the garment side of things, one of the organizations we work with is Assisi Garments. This is a mission-driven business. It is owned by Franciscan nuns. And why do Franciscan nuns own a business like this? Because they work with vulnerable women. They own schools. They have women with disabilities, and they didn't have any employment opportunities. So they set up a business to provide training and employment for vulnerable and disabled or otherly abled women. So what this does for these women, respects their labor rights, it gives them training, employment, and career opportunities which they otherwise would not have. Assisi has been moving down the value chain because they started off as garment factories, but then they've sort of expanded downwards, setting up their own spinning mills and things as well. So again, they can generate more jobs for these vulnerable women. Now, not all the employees in Assisi are women, I should note. Things are never that simple. So a lot of the more skilled labor have historically been men. But what we've seen over time as Assisi is growing, we're getting more of these women who were mostly just sewing, moving into more skilled positions and actually moving into managerial positions as well. That's a very important dynamic. So when you set something up, it takes on a life of its own and can develop in interesting ways. And while Assisi is sort of incorporated as a standard, for-profit organization, practically it's really a nonprofit, because what do the nuns do with all their profits? They put it back into their hospitals, their orphanages, their hospices, and their schools. So again, we can just sort of play that out in terms of the various sustainable development goals that this contributes to. Again, if we have more questions later, I can talk in more details about some of these things. But I think you're getting a sense of how fair trade and fair trade cotton specifically can really contribute to the sustainable development goals, especially when you're increasing the capacity of these organizations, democratically controlled producer organizations, and mission-driven businesses that are in the middle of the chain, the garment side of things. So how do fair trade cotton t-shirts work? What can you do with them? How can they be used? Here's another shout out. That woman in the middle with glasses is Bev Toes, for those of you who don't know. Bev is a high school teacher in Olds, Alberta. She sat on the board of Fairtrade Canada, but she's a very active promoter of fair trade in many different ways, and literally a rock star. As you can see, she has her own band, which has fair trade t-shirts that they wear for that. So I'll say a little bit more about Bev as we move on here. So there's lots of markets for t-shirts. I'll get to teams in a bit, but just so that you're aware. So university promotions, events, Orange Shirt Day, Pink Shirt Day, Earth Day, all types of things, different celebrations. Here is the University of Toronto, Mississauga, their celebration for becoming the first silver designated fair trade university in Canada. Oops, there's more people with Bev in a banana costume there. Oops, this didn't quite turn out proper order there. Student clubs and organizations by lots of different types. You get organizations like WUSC, Engineers Without Borders, which are located on different campuses. They buy different shirts. There's academic groups, there's cultural groups. It's a really important market, which is somewhat underdeveloped. Oops. There's also uniforms. There's Fair Trade Canada, who have Fair Trade t-shirts. Individually, people order t-shirts through bookstores. They buy them online, and get online shirts. These are what you would see if you went to our website, for example. We allow people, to buy individual shirts with a Fair Trade logo, Fair Trade Campus. If you're a cooperative, you can buy different cooperative shirts. If you have sustainability, so we have different designs that people can do individually. But what we're talking about today is teams and organizations, what you can do. Here is the Olds High School girls volleyball team. So t-shirts for teams is really an underappreciated but challenging market to get into. And it depends on different factors. So one is the level of competition. So varsity teams are much higher because they have much higher standards for uniforms. If you're working intramural, that's very easy. They just normally wear cotton uniform, but not at varsity levels. Many of the uniforms, which are made by Nike or different large corporations, are very high tech and all sorts of polyesters and things that go into them. Less so at high schools, junior highs and elementary versus high schools, right? And at university, it's all very high tech, right? It also depends on what types of sports you're into. So this is a volleyball team. Many volleyball teams will just wear cotton shirts, soccer, cross country. Basketball, less so. Obviously, football jerseys, hockey jerseys are not cotton either. So depending on what sort of sports you're in, you know, and what level you're at. So for example, the women's lacrosse team from the University of New Brunswick uses our shirts for their, you know, we'd never anticipated that. But there's lots of different uses for these types of sports and athletics teams. A really underdeveloped area is PE classes, gym wear, right? We tried to talk with some Catholic schools about this. It's very difficult because they have their own suppliers and it's a challenge, less so in other schools perhaps, but a really important area because people wear t-shirts in gym classes. There's also lots of summer camps. There's co-op camps. There's all sorts of sports camps. Most universities have summer camps for students and things. In addition, there's all sorts of other competitive teams. They don't sweat as much usually, hopefully. So debate teams, model UN teams, moot court teams, these are probably more in universities, business case study competitions, all these groups that sort of want to identify themselves. And as we spoke before, also other types of organizations and schools, right? So we're talking mostly about fair trade t-shirts here. Of course, there's lots of other potential products. Polo shirts, or some people call them golf shirts. You know, if you go to the York University bookstore, you can buy polo shirts. We're a small company. We don't stock these. We hope to do that in the future. We order them on demand for larger customers. Our bookstore has just started to do these for, you know, our law school, for our business school, for different organizations. There's also hooded and crew neck sweaters, which really sell well. We are just moving into this market. We're putting in our first pilot order next week for these things. There's other things, a little bit humorous here. We started making masks because of COVID. These are just recycled shirts we've used. One of our, Eileen, who I mentioned before, has been, you know, sewing these masks, mostly for promotional purposes, just to give to some of our favorite buyers and things. But hopefully that's a good overview of fair trade t-shirts and how they can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I've probably spoken longer than I should, but hopefully you've got some questions, comments, ideas, concerns, suggestions.
That really was fantastic, Darryl. We really, really appreciated that. And hopefully we do have some questions from the attendees today. We do have one there, but I just wanted to make a comment. It definitely sounds like Green Campus Co-op is the solidarity-based type of organization. And it's really important that businesses and organizations in Canada do have this opportunity, because the reality is the most of them probably aren't able to set up those value chains and producer chains the way that Green Campus Co-op has. So thank you, first of all, for providing everyone the opportunity to access these. So there is a question, and the question here is from Uzal Litton. It says, I am wondering about the quality and price of fair trade t-shirts. Does the product competitive to existing product in terms of quality and price?
Yes, so in terms of quality, again, Normally we do a thread count of a weight of about 160 to 180, which is a very high quality shirt. It's not something you can rip apart like, you know, those event shirts or things. We can order different things. We do only hire, you know, order high quality shirts because we want them to last. We want people to wear them. If universities are giving away shirts, we want students to wear those, not just for orientation day. Again, it has to do with sustainability, making sure that these get used. And if they're cheap shirts, students won't wear them, they'll throw them away. And we also encourage universities to think about that in terms of their design for products as well. So we, in terms of individual standards, we can order what customers want if they want to order enough of those. But in terms of the stock we keep, it's all high quality products. But we have limited stock because we're a small company.
Perfect. Thank you for that. The next question is from Donna. What is the difference between Fairtrade cotton and Better cotton?
So the Better Cotton Initiative, and this is a strategy that corporations have done with a lot of organizations, a lot of fair trade products. So the first fair trade product was coffee, and that was set up by a cooperative in Mexico. And that was the first fair trade seal Max Havelaar. And a Dutch corporation was supposed to participate in that initiative, and it decided not to. And what it did instead, it set up its own labeling body, an industry-led body with lower standards, without the same benefits for producers. They don't require producers to be democratically organized. They don't provide them with minimum prices. So every time in fair trade, when they have a new product, what we see is industries coming in. So when fair trade set up fair trade cotton, almost immediately cotton producers got together and set up the Better Cotton Initiative. And that is a large corporate-led organization with much lower standards and not giving nearly as much to the producers. And again, as in most of these other organizations, they don't require producers to be democratically organized, which is key for developing the capacity of these organizations. They don't have minimum prices. They often don't have any social premium, and they usually involve estate production, depending on the products.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So there's about 5 minutes remaining in the presentation today, and I just wanted to let you know that I've had about 4 questions pop up into the question and answer feed here. So if you could take a minute or so to answer each question. The first one, very simple. For your Green Campus Co-op shirts, do they fit similar to standard shirts, or do they run a bit smaller or larger?
I can send you our price, our size chart, which if we don't have it up on our website, we will put up on our website. So, so unfortunately, there's no one standard size everywhere. Different companies have their own sizes, but I'll make sure we put our size chart up there so people can see what they are.
Perfect. Thank you for that. There's another question here. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the Sustainable Egg Production and Distribution Project?
The Sustainable Egg Production?
That's what it says.
Is that AG or EGG?
EGG.
I'm not sure what that's referring to.
Okay,
So
we can.
I don't think.
Maybe,
more detail.
maybe let me ask that person. Yeah, we can do that in just one moment. The next question, how can those products be implemented to affordability among racialized, maybe poor areas where, in my experiences, they're still trying to get their needs?
This is a challenge. If we want to pay people well at the bottom, it costs more, but doesn't always cost a lot more. So, you know, people have a certain price elasticity. If they really like something and are committed to it, they don't think about spending, you know, $30 for a t-shirt. We don't charge $30 for a t-shirt. And, you know, our costs are kept relatively low unless we have to print shirts here, then that will raise up the cost of our prices. So we try to do most of the printing in the South, but we can only do that for large volumes. So it's a challenge for doing that. And this is why, many people buy these cheap t-shirts because that's what they think they can afford, right? But there's no easy solution to this. This is why we focus a lot on institutions to help them help us grow. Because as we grow, we can also help keep our prices down. But our goal is not to keep our prices down at the expense of farmers and workers in the South. It's by increasing the ability of consumers or the willingness of consumers to pay the real cost of the shirts, and by shrinking the margins that people in the middle take, like your traditional distributors like us, who, well, we're not traditional, but that's where a lot of the profits go and a lot of the cost comes in. So as a nonprofit, that's where we try to shrink things. At the same time, help consumers understand that usually they're not paying the full costs for all the shirts, especially the environmental costs.
Okay, and there's just a comment here that says from Bev Toes, students who have worn Fairtrade t-shirts search me out to tell me how much they like t-shirts in terms of comfort and quality. That really doesn't happen with other t-shirts, so that's just a comment there. We are coming towards the end of the presentation today. So if you do have more questions, by all means, you can ask them. We can try to get back to you to make sure those questions do get answered eventually. But for now, I just would like to say thank you, Darryl, so much for the insight and information. We appreciate the time so much that you took today to speak to the delegation, discussion on fair trade, and how it works in terms of value chains and how it works towards achieving the SDGs is very important. More and more organizations are committing to sustainability. And for those organizations who share values of fair trade, it only makes sense to purchase fair trade goods, especially when prices are comparable, as you mentioned.
If I can just say, Laura, that, if people go to our website, we have a lot of information there as well, and links to other organizations, Fairtrade Canada, Fairtrade International, and they can email us and send us questions that way too.
Oh, that's absolutely perfect. And I have posted the website in the chat here. So the website is greencampus.coop. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. And MCIC, of course, is looking forward to seeing organizations, schools, teams, and businesses make the switch to Fairtrade t-shirts. In addition to Green Campus Co-operative, there's a couple of other Canadian suppliers that have the capacity to produce custom designed t-shirts and ship them nationally. I am going to post a link right now in the chat to a procurement document on Fairtrade t-shirts that MCIC has prepared that lists all three organizations that do prepare those custom printed t-shirts. And so I think that's it. It's 1 o'clock. Thank you so much, Darryl, for your presentation today. And I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the time of all participants.
And thank you, Laura, for organizing this. This has been wonderful. And thank everyone for participating.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone, and have a great afternoon. If you do have any questions, by all means, Darryl, if you just want to flip the last screen there. You can contact me at sustainability@mcic.ca or find more information at mcic.ca as well. Thank you so much to everyone.